I have always been a very nostalgic person. I really like going to places that bring back memories. I remember for a short time I studied the science or the technical aspects of handwriting. And one of the things that I learned in that process is that, well, I tend to strike my dots just to the left of the letter I. Now, that's something none of us would notice, but when I read that indicates a person who thinks in the past, well, I knew there must be something to it. Well, I am a nostalgic person, and in my childhood, I was raised by a farmer's son. Although in the city of Toronto, but he was from New Brunswick, and, well, every year, every summer, he packed up his family, myself and my siblings and my mom, and, well, they packed up their coolers full of food because, when you're raising a big family, you can't be stopping at every restaurant along the way. Oh no. The packed lunches, well, even the cereals that we had for breakfast. Always there was a Coleman stove, and always there was, well, oatmeal to be boiled up. And I remember once in a while, just for fun, just for the treat, my mother would pick up those packages of cereal that came in an assortment of 8 or 10 different flavors. Those little individual packed cereal boxes that we just love cutting them open and pouring the milk right inside. It was the greatest treat, but it only happened when we went on those trips. We used to drive through Ontario and then through Quebec, and then we would cross over into New Brunswick, and it was always quite a long, long journey. But my father was great. He always made room for us to stop along the way, well, and do some picnicking and rock climbing. I'll never forget when I was a kid, I used to really be enamored with the whole mountaineering kind of a thing, and every time I saw those rock faces along the highway, I used to beg my dad, can we stop at that one? Can we stop at that one? I want to go climb. Well, now when I think of it, and I think of those rock faces, and I think how fragile they are, how dangerous it was. But my father, in his wisdom, only stopped at the safe ones, of course. And once in a while, we would go for little walks into the woods, or we would stop into a national park and we would enjoy the sights. From time to time, my father made sure that we had extra time, and he would plan his trips to be 2 days or 3 days instead of 1 day. And we would camp and we would enjoy the sights along the way. What a wonderful childhood. I like to think that when you do those kinds of, well, take your time travels, I like to say, instead of flying, you learn a lot about the regions that you go to. And I really learned through those many, many summer trips out to the farm and to the rural parts of New Brunswick about the lifestyle that was lived and the way my father was raised. Well, it was definitely not easy, that's for sure, but it was a slower life, certainly compared to the roller coaster we live on in today, I should say. Yeah, it was a slower life, but I learned to love the pastures. And at one point in my life, when I was not long married, we had a house that was in Pickering, Ontario, and just a mile or two north, you could be in the middle of the farmlands, and many of those fields are still there today. So recently, in one of my little nostalgic drives, I took a little drive out to the north part of Pickering. And there it was, this fence-lined field. I loved it. I took a few photographs as I typically do. And then I set out a couple of sketches. Then coming back to my studio, I set this canvas up on the board, on the easel, and I began to do this beautiful little work. Now, I say little work because this is not a big canvas. This is just an 8x10. And it's really just a way for me to map out the colors that I want to use should I decide to do this larger. And I've tinted the background. In this case, I've done it with a kind of a purplish blue. I did that with an acrylic paint, and I did that simply because I wanted to get rid of the white. Sometimes when you paint, you leave a little of the canvas surface between your strokes. And to make sure that the white doesn't show, I like to tint my canvases. And that's really the only reason why I do that. You don't have to do that, but I do it. Now, the vibe that I got from this great little space was, well, it was all about the depth and the movement of the air and the grasses. Well, this was a pasture for cattle, and as is the case in Ontario, especially just around the northern tips of the Toronto area where there are still quite a few farms, we have an area called it's the Golden Horseshoe, and it wraps all the way around Lake Ontario along the western end, and it's mostly filled with the population that is Toronto, Hamilton, and Durham region where I live now. But around the perimeter of that is a great swath of land that the government has set aside, not allowed to develop anything there. And the farm fields abound. Now, even though that's been somewhat challenged because everyone's looking for places to build homes, but north of Pickering, there's this great, vast area where the farms still exist, just close to where I used to live and where I used to go for walks and drives and little painting excursions. And so I returned. I just love the way the grasses just flow down into the valley. And there happened to be an old wire fence post line, I guess you could say. They were crude posts. They were made of old trees, and the longer they sat out there, they would become quite gnarly and textured. But in a painting, you want to have the closer ones appear a little taller, and as they recede into the distance, you want them to be smaller. And that will give you the sense of depth and distance and proper perspective. In the sky, well, those clouds against the blue, they were just moving at a breakneck pace, quite a breezy day. I put that movement into the grass, as you can see. I let the trees sway a little bit. And in the sky, well, there's some ultramarine blue. There is a little bit of Prussian blue, but there's mostly titanium white, and that gives us that nice airy feeling. And I'm using a number 5 filbert brush, and it's just a kind of a fan effect that I'm using. I'm not applying the paint too densely or too heavy. I'm just applying it rather thin, and I'm putting it into zones. You can see that I did the blue first, the light blue, then I added the white, and then around the white I'm just using that nice ultramarine. It's really a good thing to have 2 or 3 shades of blue in the sky. Otherwise, your sky might just become a big blue. You've seen it. You know how many paintings the sky is just one tone. And I like to make it a little more interesting because, after all, the sky is, the sunlight illuminates the sky with different values and with different colors. Different shades of blue and gray and white. Using that big old brush, I just tap around the edges of the white, and I'm not pressing too hard. I'm just gently touching the canvas surface and putting my colors in place. At this point, I'm just allowing them to touch each other and just slightly blend. I don't want to blend too much. Of course, I could do that if I wanted to, but then that might create too bland of a surface. No, I'm allowing the colors to sort of exist together and sort of shake hands, if you will. They're coexisting, and they're doing this dance in the sky as the breezes blow. And don't forget, between those little tree branches, let a little bit of that sky show as well. That's just going to give you that more realistic 3-dimensional kind of a feel. See that? A little tap here and there. Just a little light through the tree branches. That becomes a little more believable, you see. I have a little bit of white that I'm going to tap onto the fence posts here. I put a little bit of vermilion in it as well, just to make it a little warmer feeling instead of just a cold white. And that is just giving a little bit of highlight onto my fence posts. That's all. Not too much, just enough to make them pop a little bit, to announce themselves, to say, here we are. And you can walk along those fence posts and just kind of let the breezes blow and let this place take you to another world. Well, sometimes you don't even need a brush, do you? Just use the tip of your finger. Just smear the paint a little bit. Soften the bottom edge. That's where the breezes are blowing and just scattering those puffy white clouds across the sky. Now I'm starting to feel the wind. It's not an imposing wind. It's not a stormy wind. It's a very happy day. I'll just love it. And it goes with my feeling of nostalgia of wanting to go back to those times when, being out there was such a joy and such a pleasure. I'll even use my finger to just tap some new titanium white right onto the surface and just gently blend it. There we go. We're getting there, folks. Now, I don't want you to forget something very important. Sign your paintings, and sign a very small and almost inconspicuous signature. You want to be there so that people know who painted this, but you don't want your signature to overwhelm the painting and become a distraction. So there it is, MCAFFEE. That's me, Robert McAfee. And I just want to take a moment to, thank you for dropping in and hanging out with me for these 15 minutes or so while I paint this little walk back in time to a pastoral field north of Pickering, Ontario, near where I live. And if you got a moment, by all means, like and subscribe, and drop in, see the other paintings at robertmcafee.com. And I'll thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on The Robert Painter on YouTube.